So we move into Mary Shelley's great novel Frankenstein. I want to note a few things about the novel, things you can read for and note as you kind of develop familiarity and working knowledge of the novel. This great novel that's now 200 years old, but yet treats some kind of very fresh concerns and problems and issues in thinking about science and the ways in which we have knowledge of the world. First, to set some historical context for the novels, Shelley says in her introduction from 1831 to the novel, the Frankenstein comes out of a trip that she makes with her husband to Lord Byron's castle in the summer of 1816. That those gathered there had kind of got together and devised a contest where they would each try to write ghost stories or horror stories, and then to try to frighten one another. And this becomes Shelley's work there. Frankenstein is the story that she develops within that goal. She says that with the novel, a kind of a series of successive images begin to arise in her mind as she kind of thinks about the horrors of her moment and the things that she's struggling with psychologically and socially. But it begins with the phantasm of a man stretched out, and so the creature arises, the monster of the novel arises from this kind of inner vision she has of this phantasm. And one of the things that's really interesting about this novel, of course, right, is that the terrors that are present within it are, not there in terms of just trying to frighten you, but the kind of like deeper chords of terror that strike within us. And so in Shelley's writing, she said that she was trying not to write a series of supernatural terrors, but to develop a creature that reflects the more mysterious fears of our own nature. And so that's one of the tensions in this novel, right, is how you as reader find points of identity with Frankenstein, Victor, the scientist, or how you find empathy or understanding for the monster or the creature. A few notes about the novel's form and frame, the way that it's set up and organized. This is a second-person narration generally, that the novel is told first in a series of letters, so it's an epistolary novel, letter or epistle, and it's also an account that's given by Victor Frankenstein to Captain Walton of where he has been. Walton finds Victor wandering in the Arctic and rescues Victor, and then Victor unwinds his tale for Walton. One tension is this, intention in this is how Walton feels sympathy for Victor's storytelling here, how he feels sympathy for Victor's self-narration as Victor unwinds his tale of woe and his struggles. In what ways does Walton feel understanding of those things? And you can also kind of wonder about your own response to Victor's tale. Do you feel a similar sense of empathy for Victor, or sympathy for Victor, or the creature as Victor relates the creature to us? Do you feel empathy there? Victor will tell his tale of making the creature, of flight from that creature, and then the attendant violence that follows their meetings later on. And as a reader, do you feel any kind of tension in the fact that Victor is unable to empathize with his creation? So is this a failing on Victor's part, and how does that cause you to rethink him as a character? That is, that he can't have empathy for something that he has made as his creation, or do you read him as Victor's child in a sense as well? We'll also get the creature's own tale of his exile and his suffering, and then his attempts at revenge that he takes upon Victor in the end. And how do you feel a sense of empathy for the violences that are present there as well? Victor's a very complicated character as he relates his own story. As Walton will say about him, such a man has a double existence. And so there are a lot of interesting qualities to Victor that you can note as you read. One thing that's interesting to me is, you note the moments in which twins kind of appear in the novel. Writers will do this thing called twinning, where they'll use two different characters to show different facets or faces of each other. And so you can note how Victor and the monster, or the creature here, reflect one another's qualities as creator and creature, as father and son. In what ways do these twins appear in the storytelling? You can also do a psychological reading of Victor's own story and the ways in which he tells it, and kind of note the obsessive qualities that mark his behaviors and his storytelling, his self-narration here. The kind of hubris or pride that he takes in his knowledge, the moments where he displays repressed guilt for the effects of the violence that he is kind of the maker of within the story. You can think about his relationship to the monster. What does it mean that he is the creature's maker, or the creature's father in the end? In what ways does he take on those identities, or in what ways does he repel those identities? You think about like the obsessions that are involved in all of his journeys here, right? As he tries to escape the monster, or tries to pursue the monster, what ways are those also obsessive qualities for Victor? At one point on page 130, he'll say that I was the slave of my creature, which is this kind of interesting irony to the moment, right? That he creates this other being, and but yet feels enslaved by the being in the end. The monster recognizes this as well, and on 142 he'll say, "You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey me." And so Victor's ability or inability to live with this reality creates some interesting tensions in the novel that you might note as you read. Of course, the monster is a focal point within the novel, in the ways in which he reveals kind of human qualities in the very fact that he is not a human being, but is kind of created somewhere outside of nature. Victor will refer to him in all kinds of ways. He'll call him the abhorred monster, the fiend, the daemon. The monster is a creature, he is made, but instead of identifying with the biblical Adam, the creature here identifies more with John Milton's Satan from Paradise Lost, seeing himself as, quote, wretched, helpless, and alone. So the tensions in being a creature and yet feeling cut off from his creator or maker drives the novel in a lot of ways. Also, you might note that one thing that's really interesting to me in reading this novel are the times where Victor kind of has to come face to face with the psychological possibilities that others don't understand, the creature's presence or existence. And sometimes they'll even point to the fact that these are projections of Victor's imagination. On page 163, after the violence against Victor's wife, Elizabeth, Victor will say that the companions believe that the creature to have been a form conjured by my fancy. And so is the creature just an imagined being in Victor's mind here? An interesting way you might kind of think about the novel here as well. We can also, think about the aspects of the creature's character here in that regard. He has the figure of a man, but moves with superhuman speed. So, he has this kind of like superhero-like quality to him in the ways that he moves through the world as he, goes over the mountains and bounds around as he moves. As opposed to kind of the way that Frankenstein sometimes depicted as slow moving and encumbered. a kind of central tension to the creature as a character is that on pages 79 80, where he notes that, "Yet you, Victor, my creator, detest me, thy creature." And so you can ask yourself, what is it exactly that the creature wants here? Does he want revenge upon Victor, or does he want Victor's recognition, as much like a son or a child in the end? You can also think about the creature's self-awareness throughout the novel, the ways in which he develops a facility for language. Does he have a kind of an inborn innocence that is present from the beginning of his consciousness? And how does that fall apart when he makes that realization, right? What was I but a monster, a blot upon the earth? And so how does the creature think of himself, and how do we kind of understand that self-awareness in comparison to our own ways of measuring human self-awareness here? And how do you respond as a reader to the creature's violence in the end? Do you pin it on Victor as being the maker of this violence, or do you purely blame it on the creature as a monster who, as he notes on 118, 119, I too can create desolation, and the creature certainly does bring plenty of desolation upon Victor. How much guilt you attach to him in that regard? And the final question in terms of your reading here is to always kind of be thinking about how you respond to this monster's tale in the end. Do you feel empathy for the creature as a character? Do you feel a sense of identification with him in his loneliness or his exile, or his Victor's incapacity to recognize the creature as his child or son, and what horrors are present there?